about we're talking about Church Next here. So really excited about that. But hang out. We'll be back in just a little bit. Hey, welcome everybody. We'll be starting here in a few minutes. So go ahead, get comfortable. Really looking forward to talking together. So yeah, just give me a couple of minutes for everybody to jump on. One thing that's kind of cool, not related to anything today, but this is the 1-year anniversary of Kingdom Impact being launched, and so excited about that. What a fun adventure it's been to write that. And 1 year ago today, actually, that launched. You can still get that on Amazon if you haven't read it, but thought that was fun. Ashton sent that my way. Thank you, Ashton, for that. And yeah, Kingdom Impact, wherever books are sold. Some of the ideas in there we're talking a little bit about in this, but yeah, that's enough for now. I'm gonna go ahead and vanish here, and we'll see you in 20 seconds. Okay. Hey, everybody. I was just having some fun there playing with the new program. Enjoyed that. Goofed around with that a little bit. I am really, really excited for what we're going to be doing today. What are we doing? We're going to be starting a series where we're talking about Church Next. And I'm really, really excited for this series. I'm very excited about this content because it has been just really significant journey for me, and I'm excited to be able to take today and some sessions coming up in the future as well to really begin to explore what's happening with this this content here. So what are we doing? Well, first of all, this is taking some of an e-course that is actually still in production a little bit. I am producing it as we go. So pray for me that I'm able to get that all done as we go here. But what we're going to do is we're going to take some time, and section by section, we're going to be talking about some of the contents and the highlights of the e-course, and engaging and doing some Q&A and so forth as we go. And so thanks for joining, those of you who are on. I can see some of the comments coming in. It's good to see you guys. Thanks for joining. I want to, before we go ahead and jump in, say if you have not jumped in on the e-course, please go ahead and do that. I'm sure Ashton or someone can put the link on there. I'm busy talking, so it's a little more difficult for me to add the link into the comments there, but would someone please post the link for the Church Next e-course, so anyone who hasn't had the opportunity can jump on. There's no cost. There's not going to be a cost. And so, that would be something that you can just go ahead and jump on for no addition. Hey, Liz. Hey, from England. Hi, Linda and Marilee. It's good to see you guys, Debbie. But yeah, you can go ahead and jump on that e-course for no cost. There is going to be a lot of content there. It's going to be a lot of great stuff, and I don't have time to talk about all of it in this. This is sort of like highlights and Q&A. And so if you haven't, please go ahead and jump in on that e-course. It's really good. This is not a marketing gimmick. There's no upsell at the end of it. That is not what's happening here. No, this is just me trying to get the word out on some of the journey that God's taken me on and some of the stuff. Thank you, Cassie, for posting that. Some of the stuff that God's been just unpacking and so forth. And so with that, let's talk about, I want to kind of like intro where we're going to be headed a little bit with the course. So a little bit on who I am, a little bit on the journey, and just sort of top level stuff in terms of where we're headed. And then we'll conclude here with any time for questions if anyone has them. Please don't feel like you need to wait until the end. We'll go ahead and post them as we go. That will be helpful. So we've got those kind of queued up when we get to the end there. But yeah, a little bit about who I am and where we're headed. So if you don't know me, my name is Putty Putman. I am a pastor at a Vineyard Church here in Central Illinois. I live in Champaign-Urbana. It's a couple of hours south of Chicago. And I have been in pastoral ministry for about a decade at this point. I started there as a pastor in 2010. So I'm coming up on a decade of pastoral ministry. And so I've got a little bit of experience working with the local church context and discipleship and ministry in that regard. But what makes me unique is not just that, but a blend of some other things that are going on. The next thing, which is not usual combination with pastoral ministry, is my training and my background in the sciences. Specifically, I have a PhD in theoretical quantum physics. And if you want, you can see I put a link in the e-course to my dissertation if you're interested in scoping that out. It's true, it's real. But anyway, yeah, so the reason that's relevant is physics, and particularly theoretical physics. Usually when we encounter it in high school and whatever, it's not immediately clear to us what's going on with this whole physics thing. But what physics is totally about is it's about problem solving. It's about understanding and analyzing systems, how they work, what is contributing to the reason things happen. And a PhD in quantum physics is essentially world-class training in understanding how systems work, why the things are happening that are happening. A lot of that happens through mathematical modeling, but the idea is actually more problem solving and systemic analysis. And the combination of those two together, pastoral ministry plus PhD in physics, means I probably have a bit of a unique vantage point on understanding why is the church working the way it's working. Now, you take that and you add together the fact that I've had the privilege for the last, 5 or so years to really have a breadth of experience in terms of the training school that I help run, which is called School of Kingdom Ministry. That has spread across the country, even around the world. And so I've had experience not just with my local church context, but with seeing the church globally, seeing the church internationally, and how the church is working in the backdrop of society in the West and not in the West. All of these things have kind of fused together to an interesting combination that is rather unique. It's not common for all of these things to come together. And what I want to do is I just want to share my perspective. There's been an interesting journey that God started actually in 2017 with me, where it was actually, interestingly, right around the time of the 500th anniversary of the Reformation. In 1517, just a little bit of church history, in 1517, this monk guy named Martin Luther nails 95 theses to a door in Wittenberg, Germany, and essentially says, guys, I think we need to talk about these things that the church seems to be teaching, which I don't understand where they come from. They don't seem like they're in the Bible. Why is this the way that it is? And he's just trying to start a conversation. But what happens is God kind of breathes on it. It sort of goes all over the place. And what winds up happening is one of the most important cultural transitions in global history ever as a result of that. And all of this kind of stirs around in me for, in this 500 year anniversary in 2017. And I really just feel impassioned that like this kind of thing needs to happen again. Like the church needs to lead with ideas. We need to understand what society is. We need to be helping advance the direction that society is going in and so forth. And all of this is just like stirring around in me. And the Lord just really falls on me one day and really convicts me that this is a direction that I need to be leaning into and pressing into. And so for me, that really starts a journey. And specifically the journey is kind of dusting off my physicist training, my physicist perspective, and really a new marrying of the pastoral ministry and the physics training and analysis and so forth winds up coming about. And that's kind of unique. That's kind of interesting. And for the last really 2.5 years since then, there's been a lot turning around, a lot of conversation with God and people and leaders all over the world, and looking at essentially the rapidly changing backdrop of the world that we live in. And what's fascinating to me is, right now, the situation that we're in presently, the international global COVID crisis, has forced this awareness of, oh my goodness, the world is changing. Nothing's ever going to be the same. And all of that is totally true. But what's fascinating to me is that's what God's been telling me for a couple of years. Actually, we started this whole course before the COVID crisis hit. And so, I'm thinking the world is changing, all of these things are happening, and then this COVID crisis drops, and it just to me feels like it's another confirmation of, wow, the world really is changing. And what that means is we as the church have got to understand where it's going. We've got to be thinking and tracking and trying to lead, not follow, in terms of what's happening with our global changing culture. We can do that. The Reformation, we did do that. The church did help lead culture. But it's going to require us really being willing to rethink a lot of things and do more deeper paradigmatic changes than we usually wrestle with sometimes with the church. We tend to like to incrementally change things, but God's doing some radical stuff. And I think we get to be right in the middle of it. I think he has some really important things for us in this hour of history as the church. It's not induced by the COVID crisis. This has been happening for decades. This COVID crisis is just another sort of benchmark along the way of everything that God is doing. And so that is what we're going to be exploring in this series, Church Next. What is God doing in the world? How is the world actually changing? What role does the church have in the midst of this changing world? And how do we play that part? How can we be part of Church Next, the next iteration, the next reinvention of what I believe is going to be a reinvention of faith and a reinvention of church and a reinvention of our mission in the world? And so that's what we're going to be talking about here in Church Next. Now, this topic, this conversation, is going to be what I would term a paradigmatic one, meaning we're actually looking at changing paradigms here. And when we talk about change and we talk about rethinking things, the idea of changing paradigms seems like it gets thrown around a lot, but is not really quite accurate the way that it's used. Jay, thank you for that comment. Apparently, 2 of the videos are mismatched, and I'll go ahead and fix that right when we're done with this live here. So thank you for letting me know that. when we talk about paradigmatic change, we are not talking about a change that you can like incorporate into your existing life. A paradigmatic change means you have to sort of go back to zero and you have to rethink everything. You have to rethink, in this instance, what we're going to be talking about is you're going to have to rethink what actually is faith. Like, what do we believe, and how does that flesh out in my personal life? And then we have to rethink, what is the church? We've got a lot of ideas in mind of what the church is, what it means to be part of the church, how that works. We're going to actually have to radically rethink that, and bigger than the way that we often talk about rethinking that. We're gonna re-explore what is the church and how does that work, and then we're gonna re-explore what is the church's mission in the world. What is our goal? What is happening over the arc of history? What is God doing in the world, and what is the church's role in that? Each of these is going to be kind of a reinvention of understanding these topics kind of from the bottom up. And they might seem like radical changes. They might seem like, whoa, I don't know where this is going. I totally get all of that. Now, don't worry, we're not going to be unbiblical. We're not going to depart, but we are going to probably talk about things that are different than perhaps what we've heard before. And so I'm very much excited about taking this journey with you. There is way too much content to summarize. And so what we'll do today here is I want to just conclude. I want to take some time talking about, okay, how do we know that if we're rethinking things, how do we do that within safe parameters? One thing that I'm seeing that's happening is people are rethinking, people everywhere are feeling and sensing the strains that are happening with culture and society in the church. There's this kind of like tension that's happening there, and it's pulling and it's pulling, and it feels like it's getting more and more taut, and something is going to have to shift. And so people are already exploring this, but not every exploration of this is going to a good place. In my opinion, there's a lot of people that are exploring it, and they're asking good questions. Could it be that we need to think about the church differently, that we need to understand the gospel and faith a little bit differently? I think these are good questions to ask, but not every answer to these questions is a good answer. There's a lot of people who are asking these questions and coming to answers that I think are unhelpful. And how do we know the difference between what's good and what's a helpful adjustment and what's not a good and not a helpful adjustment? And I think before we do any of that, we need to establish, okay, how are we going to go about this journey? What is a healthy, what is a safe way to rethink what the church is, and so forth? And so, okay, let's relook at some of this. So here are the 5 conditions that I think are important for safely rethinking things. And this is what we cover in that last section, the last video, the last element, the last lesson, I suppose, in the first section of Church Next. And so I just want to recap these because I think it's important. And then what I want to do is do some Q&A about anyone who is engaging with this content and has a question. It doesn't have to just be on this introductory portion, although certainly that would be helpful. But we'll do some open Q&A. So please feel free to text in questions as we go. Want to go ahead and address those. And hello to the friends who keep saying hi as they're entering and joining us. It's so good to have you guys with us. So, okay, how do you safely rethink things? What does that look like? Well, I want to propose that there's 5 criteria that are really helpful in doing this well. Rethinking things, paradigmatic shifts are really important, but not every paradigmatic shift is going to move you closer to God. Some are going to move you further away. How do we know how to do it well? Okay, well, a couple of these are very obvious. And so the first one is this. Okay, first of all, it's important, I think, and this is really worth mentioning. It's very important that the process of rethinking faith and church and whatever is spirit-led and spirit-directed. And this is not actually a trivial thing that I'm saying here. And here's why. There are, I believe, people who are sensing the pull between society and culture and the current expression of Christianity, and are feeling that tension. And I think there are some people who are engaging with that conversation because they feel the tension, not necessarily because God is leading them to a new solution. There's a sense of, church isn't working. I love the church, or I want to see people saved. Like, it comes out of good motives. But the problem is if God's not directing the course, then how do we know that we're not just getting, the best of human reasoning? And not to sound pejorative, but like, I know I want better than just human reasoning. I want better than the best stuff I can come up with. And so I think it's important that the journey is spirit directed. And so I think anyone who is taking one of these journeys and is sharing their thoughts and is trying to look at reinventing, things, if the Lord hasn't directed the journey, if they can't say, you know what, this started because God pushed me into it, then I think that is cause for us to say, okay, hold on, I want to make sure that I'm proceeding slowly. Now, what can't happen is someone can't say, well, God is leading me on this, and so therefore it's God, and therefore you have to listen to me. We can't impose things just because it's like, okay, I truly believe God is directing me on this journey. No, the ideas and the direction needs to stand on its own. So we can't use that to force, but at the same time, the person probably needs to be able to say, okay, I truly believe this is a spirit-led journey, that like God led me into this. I'm not here because I'm trying to figure something out on my own. I'm here because God is pushing me into this. And so number one, it needs to be led by the Spirit of truth. And that's why I said this is something that 2.5 years ago, God forced me into. You can, again, that's shared more in the course, but I think that that's important. Okay, secondly, it's got to be consistent with the word. Now, this kind of sounds like a duh. Maybe it even is a duh, but I think it's really important to say, if this isn't consistent with what God has said in his word, in fact, I might even say, if it doesn't help us understand the Bible more, understand the word better, then I think that we have to be really, really careful. In my experience, most helpful recastings of ideas help us understand the scriptures better. They don't like kind of juggle the way that we reinterpret the scriptures. They don't say, well, that part doesn't matter and this part does. They say, no, here's a broader framework that will help connect dots in your mind that haven't been connected yet. And so we want to have something that's consistent with the word. In fact, something that drives us back to the word and opens up the word in more and helpful ways. So criteria 1, spirit-led. Criteria 2 is connected and opens up the word. Criteria 3, and this is an important one. I think we need to probably put the constraint out there. This does not contradict anything that has already been found to be a heresy. So, Christianity's been around for 2,000 years. And there have been a lot of things that have been tested in those 2,000 years. There have been a lot of ideas that at first seemed like great ideas, and then it turned out were not great ideas. And those things are usually labeled heresies. And we get like very knee-jerk reaction about the word heresy, and there's some emotions that can get in the game and all of that. And I just want to sidestep around all of that. I'm not accusing anyone of saying anything. I'm just saying, look, if we look at the last 20 centuries, there have been some ideas that have been battle tested, and some of those have been found wanting by the church. Now, some people will say, oh, this idea, I disagree with that. That's heresy. That's not what I'm talking about. Okay. Heresy is not your personal convictions. And anything outside of that is heresy. That's a really silly thing that people who are kind of religious do sometimes. No, that's not what I'm talking about at all. I'm talking about things that the global broad church has battle tested and has said, yeah, that's outside the bounds of the Christian faith. There's a lot of room within the Christian faith where you can believe different things and all of that works. But then you can step outside that, like you say, look, Jesus is not the only way to salvation. You stepped outside the Christian faith. Like exactly how Jesus saves you and stuff, there's wiggle room. People can believe different things. But once you step outside that, Jesus is the way to salvation, yeah, then you're outside the Christian faith. And so there's a lot of ideas that have been battle tested. We don't want to contradict things that are places the church has already gone and found that hasn't worked. And so that's idea number 3. Idea number 4, and this is an important one, and this I think is probably the most helpful constraint, in that it helps us understand what we should expect when we rethink things and when we invite the Holy Spirit to open our eyes and understand our journey ahead. And that is this. We should expect something that doesn't add or subtract key truths, but rather takes the idea that we have, broadens the picture, and helps us understand, okay, if I were to take this broad picture and I were to focus in this specific way, it should produce the things I already believe. In other words, what we already believe is what a scientist or a mathematician might call a limiting case of a broader perspective. A good example of this, again, scientific analogy, but I hope it's not too abstract. Physics starts when this guy, Isaac Newton, invents what are called the laws of motion. And he talks about here's the way things move: force, mass, acceleration, and so forth. And those laws of motion are pretty much used for like 250 years, pretty consistently. Nobody questions them. They work great. Until this guy Einstein comes along. And Einstein says, actually, that's not how it works. It's a little more complicated than that. And he outlines what are called the rules of special relativity. And he kind of paints a picture of the world is actually a little different than Isaac Newton thought it was. And motion doesn't work the way Isaac Newton thought that it did. It actually works this way. But look, in this broader perspective, if you're like not traveling at the speed of light and you're living in the everyday world that all of us live in, that broader picture shrinks down to this picture right here, which, oh, by the way, look at that, is exactly what Isaac Newton told us. And so he outlines a broader perspective, but he says in the situation, in the scenario where you look at this part of the broader perspective, which is, by the way, the part we all live in, lo and behold, that produces exactly the ideas that you're used to. And so that can give you faith that this bigger picture doesn't contradict what you've already thought. In fact, it's just a broadening of what you already thought. And it helps you understand different areas that you maybe haven't thought about carefully. That's the kind of thing that we ideally want to have happen when we're rethinking faith and church and the world. It ought to broaden our understanding, but it ought to contain within it the nugget of what we already believe. In other words, it doesn't take what we believe and say, okay, we're subtracting what we already believe, or some part of what we believe, or take what we believe and shift it to something else. No, it broadens and says, look, this includes, but is not limited to what we already believe. That is a very healthy and helpful way to explore new paradigms, because you can get to new places, you can explore new territory without undermining the things that you already believe. When you're doing that, you're in a really good place. And that is where we're going to be heading in this church next thing. And so, right from the beginning, there's a lot of stuff out there where people are wrestling with ideas. They're trying to come to their own conclusions. It's good stuff, but it's stuff that, for me, a lot of it gives me a lot of pause. People wrestle with ideas and they come to the conclusion, I don't know that we can really take scripture very seriously. Okay, that makes me nervous, because that's saying, okay, here's what we believe, and I'm subtracting something, the authority of scripture. Or, people are wrestling with things and they're coming to unique and different conclusions about, how salvation works and, what the afterlife looks like, for example, and say, that makes me a little nervous. I'm like, hold on, like, the idea of what salvation is and how the afterlife works, like, that's been pretty universally agreed on by the church for 20 centuries. So if we're subtracting that, like, that's making me a little bit nervous. But it might be actually that we're supposed to go the other way around. Rather than taking what we understand and taking something out, what if there's a broader framework that we can come to understand that takes the nugget of what we believe and grows it out into new space? And the problem is that where we're at in the world right now, that new space and the lack of anything being in that new space, that's what's causing the tension that we feel, actually. And so we're not going to find new ideas that contradict or stand against things that we believed in. We're going to find new ideas that help recast what we believe and understand it in a broader and more significant way. Okay, the last criteria is this. The community of faith, by and large, needs to bear witness to it. So if this is a God-directed thing, then the community of faith ought to go, yeah, you know what? I sense God in that. Like, that's real. In other words, the discernment of the same Holy Spirit that lives in all of us ought to bear witness to this. And this is some of why I'm really passionate about this content, and I'm putting it out there, is I'm saying, look, I've been on this journey. I have been learning things and talking with people and exploring scriptures and exploring ideas and looking at society and coming to all kinds of different conclusions and all kinds of different ways to see and to think about faith in the church and society and our mission. But if when we explore these ideas, I'm the only one who goes, I think God is in this, then that probably means that I'm confused. Like, let's just be real. It probably means I went off on my own trip and it's not the Lord, because if it is the Lord, then the body of Christ will bear witness to it. And so this is part of what we're doing in this e-course. Part of what we're doing in these conversations is putting these ideas out there and saying, look, hey, does this bear witness to you? Does this seem like this is what God is doing in the world? Does this seem like this helps you understand your own personal journey, helps you understand what the church is? Let's have this conversation. Let's see if these ideas are bearing witness to more than just me, to all of us together as the body of Christ. These are the 5 criteria that we're exploring. Ashton, thank you for posting that as summary. So number 1, led by the Spirit. Number 2, opens up the word and is consistent with the word. Number 3, doesn't lead us into territory the church has already said this is not good turf. Number 4, helps broaden our understanding into new areas, but doesn't undermine the understanding we already have. And number 5, the community of faith bears witness to it. If we've got those things, then we're safe to play around with an idea that lives in that space. We're not deviating off into the woods. We're not asking, questions that can lead us astray. Those are questions that we can safely wrestle with without destroying and blowing up our faith and things like that. And so that's enough of the sort of course content for now. Again, even that's just some highlights. I think there's maybe 2.5 hours of content. Maybe that's too much. Maybe it's an hour and a half of content in the introductory section. I would encourage you work your way through it. Sign up for the e-course if you haven't yet. Again, it's free. It's going to stay free. There's no upsell. This is just me getting ideas out there. And so with that, let's take some time and do a little bit of Q&A. Go ahead, post any questions or even just first thoughts on the content. I know many of you have been engaging with it already to some extent. But yeah, just let me know what you're thinking, what you're asking. Right now, we'll spend a little bit of time, however long it makes sense, with the Q&A. And then next time, what we're going to do is we're going to pick up and we're going to explore the next section, which is where the content really begins. That next section is called Our Changing Reality. And we're looking at, okay, what's really going on in culture and society right now? And how is the church positioned in the midst of the radically changing world that we live in? And so that's what we'll pick up next time. But with that, let's do some Q&A. And so please go ahead, post questions, anything you've got there. I saw there was one that came in by Katerina, and she said, can you clarify what you mean by new space? That is a wonderful question. And I'm talking about it kind of abstractly here because I suppose I'm a physicist and I like to think about things in the abstract. But yeah, that's a fantastic question. So let me make a concrete, make that concrete. The first here's an example that we're going to wind up exploring a lot as we go. Christianity, as we presently understand it, is highly individually oriented. So the gospel, as we tend to think of it, is very specifically tailored to the idea of individual faith and individual redemption. When we ask, what is the gospel? Almost immediately, we jump to individuals need reconciliation to God. And we've got some details for how that works. How does Jesus do that? And so forth and so on. And all of that is good and all of that matters. The challenge with that is, one of the problems that is causing the strain in the world that we live in, I believe, is that the gospel, there's no clear way to understand how does the gospel apply to layers of society and culture that are not the individual. So, we kind of have this intuitive understanding, like the gospel ought to be changing society. The gospel ought to be changing the world. Jesus talks about ideas like discipling the nations and so forth, right? Well, what does it mean to actually disciple a nation? And how do you actually do that? And if you ask that question, it kind of seems like, okay, the only thing I can think of is you try to disciple all the people in the nation, because the gospel is oriented around this individual perspective. But what might it look like to say, okay, well, let's just even back down from a nation. Let's think about discipling our communities. Let's even back down from that. How would I disciple a neighborhood? How would I disciple a business? And let's just ask that, like, not the individuals in the neighborhood, not the individuals in the business, a business itself, a neighborhood itself. What does the gospel look like applied, I might say generically, to a social system, applied to a collection of people? How does the gospel do that? Now, we know intuitively it should. And there's things that are like, we think of that immediately come up, like justice and mercy and societal level things. Like, we know there should be these outcomes, but because of the way we've cast the gospel itself around individuals and individuals only, once we try and step outside of the individual itself into the space of asking, how does the gospel apply to a social system? We tend to find ourselves grasping at straws, if we're honest. And so we just kind of, like, as the church, we just sort of try stuff. We don't really try anything intentional and systematic and strategic, because we don't have a theological grid for the discipleship of a social system. And so then that's the kind of new space that I'm talking about. Okay, what does it look like? Like, what does redemption mean for a neighborhood or a business? Like, actually, scripturally, like, how does that actually work? That would be an example of quote unquote new space that we're kind of stretching into and exploring. And if we were to, for example, be able to say, this is the gospel that applies to the broad framework of the globe, and oh, look, that gospel applying to the globe, if you focus in on an individual, it gives you the story you're always used to, the story of individual salvation. Nothing has changed. It's broadened. And it's just that we tend to focus and zoom in here. But all of this out there is equally true and rich and important. And what's happening is, in our world, I believe, and we'll talk a lot more about this next time, in our world, we're leaving the time behind that we can pretend that we're isolated individuals that occasionally interact with the world. Everything is just too tangled up. It's too interconnected. It's impossible to see us as individuals that live in a vacuum. We're always intersecting with a broader sociological context. And we need the gospel and we need the church to be able to work in that broader sociological context for faith to feel like it is connecting to the world that the 21st century lives in. So I hope that makes sense in terms of the new space idea. Okay, Jay says, what personal sacrifices need to be made to move from independence to interdependence? So this is a great question. And it's probably one that we may revisit to some extent next time when we talk about what's happening in society. And this is where this idea of independence and interdependence are going to come in, and we'll be able to really draw them out a lot more. But to kind of like just kind of give some initial brief thoughts on that, I think as we move from independence to interdependence, what we wind up doing is we wind up sacrificing the illusion, I'll put it that way, the illusion that we have complete control over our lives and that we ought to be completely self-directed in our own life. In other words, actually what we wind up usually sacrificing is something that I might call pride. The thought that I'm an island, that everything I do should be, coming from my own thoughts or desires, that my own perspective ought to be the only one that speaks into my life. We wind up sacrificing those kinds of things. And actually for time and for season, those things actually sound and feel good. It feels like, oh man, I like to be empowered. I want to be in complete control of my life. But what happens is in time, we realize that idea is actually an illusion. If we think that we're in complete control of our life, it's just because we don't see the world well. We're too focused on ourselves. We're not really seeing the broader picture of society. And so what we wind up giving up is mostly a perspective that is not really rooted in reality too much in the first place. We can talk more about that as we go, but we give up a self-focus, I suppose, might be the biggest thing. And we welcome others into our lives in a more balanced and even and helpful way. So maybe we'll talk more about that next time. Great question. If that question seems like it's out of the blue, that's coming out of section 2 of the e-course. Make your way through the content there, and we can keep kind of picking that up next time. I'm sure we'll talk about that next time. Dependence and independence, interdependence, etc. Cheryl asks, has God given you the vision of the nuts and bolts of what this looks like? I saw your message on the Hold On Church at MLMP. Yeah, that's a great question, and a whole lot more nuts and bolts than we've been able to talk about here, and a whole lot more nuts and bolts than I was able to unpack at MLMP. The Hold On stuff is a part of it. Yes, absolutely. There's a lot to this, and the challenge is this paradigmatic stuff. Unpacking a paradigm cannot be done quickly. Like, if you're staying within the same paradigm, then you can sort of just give a top level summary. Let me give you the bullet points. Bang, 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 bang. And even if you don't do a deep dive, you can understand the gist because it's in the same paradigm. But once you start working with a different paradigm, there's no way to quickly convey what's happening, because a changing paradigm means building everything up from scratch again. And so what I want to do is I keep kind of having to give these summaries. I give a summary here. I give a summary at the Hold On message at MLMP. I give a summary in some other places. I don't want to do the summaries anymore. I want to do the whole picture. I want to unpack the whole paradigm. And so that's why I'm doing this e-course format, because there's no way to do it quickly, but at least I can do it in a way where engage with it when you've got the time, engage with it when it makes sense, but work your way through the whole thing. See the comprehensive picture, see how all the pieces fit together, and it will help understand, oh, okay, this is what this means in application. This is how this actually winds up getting played out. That's actually the goal of this e-course. And so, yeah, that's why we got to take the time. That's why we got to make our way through it. And I'm doing that as quickly as I can here. I'm hoping session by session to be getting content up and whatever in your hands quickly. I know right now there's like 7 or 8 hours-ish of content up there. More is coming. I would say there's maybe halfway of the content that I want to get up there is up, give or take. So let's just take one more question here. I know we're pretty close to like 45 minutes. And so let's see. Andrea says, oh, I suppose this isn't a question. It's amazing how a perspective can mean much and impact your whole life. Yes, exactly right, Andrea. And that's, I think, why I really want to take the time to unpack this perspective and really paint the whole picture so we can weigh it and work through it and all of that. So I'm going to give just a few more seconds here. If you have another question, please go ahead and comment that as we go here. I'll give it just a couple of more seconds. And if you don't have any more questions, that's totally cool. Just let me know if you're enjoying the content. Let me know if you enjoyed today. Let me know if you're engaging with the course and if it's been helpful. I realize these are kind of new and different ideas, and so I'm really looking for that communal weighing thing. So I'll give it a few minutes. I know when I talk here, it takes a few minutes before it shows up in the stream. So just give me some feedback here. Another question if we've got it, and we'll wrap up pretty soon here. Okay, another good couple of questions coming in. Okay, yeah, a couple of quick questions. Lo asked this question: will the church be totally digital? I think that's a great question, and I think one of the things that's a great question that I'm seeing a lot of people wrestle with, and different people are saying different things, and it's interesting to see what they're saying and why they're saying it. Without, we'll go more into this as we go, but here's what I presently believe. I believe that the digital technology that is happening in the world right now is presenting the opportunity for the digital world to layer on top of the physical world behaviors and activities that would not be possible without the digital layering. Okay, let me give you an example of this. Uber. Uber is a company that's very interesting. So the business that they do is a digital augmentation of reality that facilitates physical things happening. So Uber doesn't digitally drive you anywhere. Someone physically drives you somewhere. But what Uber does is they sort of blanket a digital layer on top of reality that allows you to say, hey, this person over here who's able to give a ride and that person over there who needs a ride, let me connect the two of you in the digital space so something can happen in the physical space. And the places where the digital technology that exists is really changing the world happens in those kinds of places. It happens in the place where the digital layer kind of augments the physical reality that's happening. And I think what's going to happen with the church in this time is that is going to empower physical things happening in the church that couldn't have happened before, but it's not going to replace the church. Yeah, you said like an extension of the church. Yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it. A digital augmentation of the physical reality that we're living in that is empowering the church to be the church in new ways it couldn't be before. There's so many ways where the constraints and the limitations that we run into in the church are because of things that the digital layering could free us up. So like, just imagine this. This is kind of a random idea, but imagine what could happen is this. Let's imagine you had an app on your phone. And I understand there's all kinds of policy questions and whatever. Push all that aside, okay? Let's just imagine it could happen. Imagine you had an app on your phone that anytime you went to a public space, if you said, yes, I want this to happen, when you enter a public space, it would ping you and say, bing, there's other Christians that are in this space right now. This person, photo profile, is a Christian. This person, photo is a Christian. This person, photo is a Christian. And so instantly you walk into a coffee shop and you see these three people are believers. You've never met them, but instantly you know the most important thing in the world you have in common with them. Why would you not go over and start a conversation? Why would you not go, hey, I want to get to know you a little bit. Let's talk about this Jesus who we both think is incredible and amazing and is changing our lives. That's the kind of, I'm just making that up. Whether that would be helpful or not, I don't know. But here's the point. That's absolutely impossible now unless that physical augmentation of reality were to help us be a better connected church than we've ever been. Now, does that mean that like local churches disappear? I hope not. I think local churches are really important. I think local churches need to stay. But I think the idea that like, wait a minute, the body of Christ might be able to interact differently because of the interconnectivity that's now possible through digital technology. I think that right there is what's going to begin to change the church. Because now if those things begin to become regular ongoing interactions, wow, now this thing of church unity, which we struggle with so much. Why do we struggle with church unity? Because there's no way to be connected outside of Sunday mornings. And Sunday mornings, by definition, you can't do with everyone. It just doesn't work. Well, now all of a sudden, there's all kinds of things that are going to be possible. And so that's an example of the kind of direction that I could see this thing going, if that makes sense. I don't think it's something as naive as a digital replacement. I think the people who are playing with digital tools and not asking what is God doing in the world would say things like, yeah, there's going to be digital replacements for church. I think what God's doing is actually more nuanced and interesting than that. Okay, a few more questions come in. Let me just see if any of them are able to quickly address. Let's see, just one more. Any thoughts on Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, considering so much of this is based on the Reformation? Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it would be my heart, it would be my desire that this content might actually help us bridge the gaps that we feel with some of those branches of faith. So, Eastern Orthodoxy and Catholicism, maybe it's that unexplored space where we have more similarities than differences. It would actually be my hope that that could be the case. And in general, it would beyond that be my hope that as we move from thinking about faith primarily as an independent thing to thinking about it more as an interdependent thing, that gives us the tools that we need to be able to relate to people who do believe substantially different from us without breaking down the barriers, without breaking down relationships, sorry. So it would be my hope that actually this would help us build bridges to those groups of faith. Now, I do talk a lot about the Reformation in this, and I use that as an analogy to understand what God is doing here. But I don't think that the elements of the Reformation that caused the breaking of relationship and the breaking of fellowship or unity with those branches of the church, I don't think those are actually the key ideas. Rather, it's looking at what happens when faith goes through a seismic shift and how that faith moving through a seismic shift intersects society and culture. That's the key thing I'm trying to draw out from the Reformation analogy. So it would be my hope that this could actually help us understand the oneness of the church and the unity that we have in the Holy Spirit and in the body of Christ in a better way. And so, yeah, we'll see. I don't know. But there's kind of some of my first thoughts. And so thanks for jumping on, everybody. I think it'd be good to wrap up here. I really appreciate this conversation. I think we're going to do another one in maybe about a weekish. Stay tuned with the On the Journey Facebook group. If you're not part of that group, join that group because that's where the events are going to be posted. I think we're going to wind up having some really great conversations. I really appreciated all the discussions here. If you are not in the e-course, once again, I think it's been pinned in the comments there. It's free. Get on, begin to work your way through the content. Next time, we're going to talk about section 2. It will be really helpful for you if you can work your way through those by next week, because it will help you just kind of understand the ideas, and that way we can kind of look at the summary of them. We're not going to have time to go in depth on every idea. And so if it's at all possible, work through that second section by next week. If you're having any trouble getting set up, just connect with us in the On the Journey Facebook group. I'm sure someone will help you get set up. It'll be great. But we'll pause for this time here. We'll pick up in a week and have another great conversation about this. Appreciate all you guys. I just pray for safety and health and God's blessing and God's provision on every single person in this really unique time. And I'm looking forward to chatting with many of you again in about a week's time. So bless you guys, and we'll see you again soon.